To my granddaughter's wedding, my daughter-in-law pointed at me and shouted, "Meet the family's biggest failure. Still lives in a basement with 2 cats." Everyone laughed, until their new business investor walked in and said, "Are you insane? That's my wife." My DIL's face turned ghost white. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought my granddaughter's wedding would be the day I'd finally understand what rock bottom feels like. Standing in that elegant ballroom, surrounded by 200 guests in their finest clothes, I felt smaller than I had in my entire 68 years of life. The Charleston Harbor Club was everything Kalia had dreamed of for her wedding venue. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, and the view of the harbor through floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking. I had helped her choose this place 2 years ago, back when she still called me regularly and asked for my opinion on things that mattered to her. Now, as I stood near the entrance in my carefully chosen navy dress, I felt like an intruder at my own granddaughter's celebration. "Oh, look, everyone." Milena's voice cut through the gentle hum of conversation like a knife. My daughter-in-law stood near the center of the reception area, her emerald dress catching the light as she gestured dramatically in my direction. "I want you all to meet someone very special." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone, that particular mix of sweetness and venom that Milena had perfected over the 15 years she'd been married to my son David. But surely, not here. Not at Kalia's wedding. "This is Ethel," she announced, her voice carrying across the room with practiced projection. "David's mother. She's what you might call the family's biggest success story." A few people turned to look at me, smiling politely, waiting for the punchline they could sense coming. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the polished marble floor and never resurface. Milena's smile widened. "She still lives in a basement apartment with 2 cats. At 68. Isn't that just precious?" The laughter started slowly, uncertain at first, then grew as more people turned to stare. My cheeks burned with shame as I watched faces I recognized from family gatherings over the years, neighbors I'd known for decades, and strangers who were now forming their first and probably only impression of me. "Milena," I said quietly, but my voice was lost in the growing murmur of amused conversation. "Oh, don't be modest, Ethel," she continued, clearly enjoying herself now. "Tell everyone about your exciting retirement. The glamorous life of a widow who collects Social Security and clips coupons." More laughter. Someone nearby whispered, "How embarrassing for the family." Another voice said, "Poor woman, she must be so lonely." I stood there, frozen, as every eye in the room seemed to be on me. This was supposed to be Kalia's day, her moment of joy, and somehow it had become my moment of complete humiliation. I thought about leaving, just walking out and never looking back. But my legs felt like lead. The worst part wasn't the laughter or the stares. It was the look on Kalia's face when our eyes met across the room. My beautiful granddaughter, radiant in her wedding dress, looked horrified and helpless. She started to move toward me, but her new husband caught her arm, whispering something in her ear. She stopped, torn between defending me and avoiding a scene on her wedding day. I made the choice for her. I forced my lips into what I hoped looked like a gracious smile and gave a small wave to the crowd, as if I were in on the joke, as if this was all perfectly fine with me. "You're all too kind," I managed to say, my voice stronger than I felt. "I do love my cats." Another ripple of laughter, but softer now, more uncertain. Some people were starting to look uncomfortable, perhaps realizing that what they were witnessing wasn't as funny as it had seemed at first. Milena's expression flickered for just a moment, a flash of something that might have been surprise or annoyance that I hadn't crumbled completely. But she recovered quickly. "Such a good sport," she said, reaching over to pat my arm in a gesture that looked affectionate to observers but felt condescending to me. "We just love having our little Ethel around. She's like the family pet." The words hit me like a physical blow. Family pet. I had raised the man she married, had welcomed her into our family with open arms, had babied her children when David was traveling for work, and this was how she saw me. This was what I had become in her eyes. I excused myself as politely as I could and made my way to the ladies' room, my dignity hanging by a thread. In the mirror, I saw an older woman with silver hair and tired eyes, wearing a dress she'd bought on sale 6 months ago because she'd wanted to look nice for her granddaughter's wedding. But as I stared at my reflection, something shifted inside me. Behind the hurt and embarrassment, I felt something else stirring, something that had been dormant for too long. They had no idea who they were dealing with. None of them did. I touched the simple gold wedding band on my right hand, the one I'd worn for exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The one that represented a secret I'd kept from my entire family. The one that connected me to a life they couldn't even imagine. I straightened my shoulders and smoothed my dress. In a few hours, everything would change. But for now, I would endure this final humiliation with the grace I'd learned over decades of being underestimated. After all, the last laugh would be mine, sitting in that bathroom stall, listening to the muffled sounds of celebration outside. My mind drifted back to where it all began. The slow, systematic erosion of my place in this family hadn't happened overnight. It had taken Milena 15 years of careful manipulation to reduce me to what I'd become in their eyes. I remembered the day David brought her home for the first time. I was 53 then, had been widowed for only 3 years, and was still finding my footing as a single woman after 32 years of marriage. Milena was 26, beautiful in that polished way that money can buy, and she looked at my modest ranch house like she was touring a museum of disappointment. "It's so quaint," she'd said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sweetness I'd learned to recognize as her signature. "David told me you've lived here forever." Forever, as if longevity in one place was something to be ashamed of. As if the home where I'd raised my son and built a life with my husband was somehow inadequate, because it didn't have marble countertops and a 3-car garage. But I'd tried so hard to make her feel welcome. I'd rearranged my entire life around her schedule, hosted every holiday because she claimed her family was too busy, and bit my tongue when she made little comments about my cooking, my decorating, my clothes. The real turning point came when Kalia was born. I had been so excited to be a grandmother, had imagined lazy afternoons teaching her to bake cookies and reading her bedtime stories. Instead, Milena treated me like an unpaid babysitter who needed constant supervision. "Don't feed her that, Ethel. It's not organic. She doesn't need to be held every time she cries. You'll spoil her. Actually, I think I'll take her home now. She's getting fussy." Gradually, my visits became shorter and less frequent. When little Marcus came along 3 years later, the restrictions became even tighter. I watched my grandchildren grow up from a distance, seeing them mainly at obligatory family gatherings where Milena controlled every interaction. The basement apartment had been my choice, technically. After Robert died, the house felt too big, too full of memories. When the young couple next door asked if I'd be interested in renting their finished basement while they saved for a house, it seemed perfect. It was clean, comfortable, and affordable on my widow's pension. I could maintain my independence without being a burden on anyone. But in Milena's narrative, it became proof of my failure. "Poor Ethel," she'd say to anyone who would listen. "She just can't seem to get her life together. We've offered to help, of course, but she's so stubborn." The offers of help were always strings attached to surrender. Move into their guest room and live by their rules. Let them manage my finances because I obviously couldn't handle money. Give up my cats because they weren't practical for an elderly woman. The cats were the final insult. Oliver and Duchess weren't just pets. They were my companions, my comfort after losing Robert. But in Milena's version of my life story, they were evidence of my eccentricity, my inability to form meaningful human relationships. What hurt most was watching David slowly adopt her perspective. My son, who had once called me every Sunday and stopped by unannounced just to chat, began treating me like a problem to be managed rather than a mother to be loved. "Mom, don't you think it's time to consider something more age-appropriate?" he'd asked last Christmas, looking around my basement apartment with the same expression Milena wore when she was particularly disappointed in something. Age-appropriate, as if being 68 meant I should be warehoused somewhere, grateful for whatever scraps of attention my family threw my way. But they had no idea what I'd been doing for the past 2 years. They couldn't conceive that their pathetic Ethel had been living an entirely different life, one that would shock them to their cores. I thought about Harold, my husband of exactly 2 years and 4 months now. We'd met at the library of all places, both of us reaching for the same biography of Winston Churchill. He was recently widowed too, lonely and kind, with eyes that actually saw me as a whole person rather than a burden or an embarrassment. Our courtship had been gentle, careful. We were both too old and too wise to rush into anything. But when he proposed, sitting in the same library where we'd met, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding had been simple, just us and 2 witnesses at the courthouse. I hadn't told my family because I knew what would happen. Milena would take over, would turn it into something about her, would find ways to make me feel small even on my own wedding day. So Harold and I had kept it private, just ours. What they also didn't know was what Harold did for a living. When I'd met him, he'd introduced himself simply as recently retired. It wasn't a lie exactly, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Harold Westbrook had spent 40 years building one of the most successful investment firms in the Southeast. His retirement meant stepping back from daily operations, not stepping away from his financial empire. My humble Harold, who drove a sensible sedan and shopped at the same grocery store I did, was worth more money than my entire family could imagine. And as his wife, I now had access to resources that would make Milena's head spin. The beautiful irony was that Harold's firm managed investments for dozens of companies throughout the region, including, I'd recently discovered, the marketing agency where Milena worked as a senior account manager, the same job she'd been so proud of, the one that had given her the sense of superiority she wielded like a weapon. I touched my wedding ring again, feeling its weight. In my purse was a letter from Harold's lawyer, delivered just this morning. Important business matters requiring my immediate attention, it had said. Something about a major client meeting that had been moved to today. A knock on the bathroom door interrupted my thoughts. Grandma Ethel. Kalia's voice was soft, worried. Are you okay? I stood up, smoothed my dress, and unlocked the stall door. My granddaughter stood there, still radiant in her wedding dress, but with tears threatening to spill over. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I had no idea she was going to do that. I would have stopped her if I'd known. I cupped her face gently, this beautiful girl who had inherited her grandfather's kind heart despite being raised by Milena. It's your wedding day, sweetheart, I said softly. Don't let anything spoil it. Sometimes people show their true colors, and that's not your fault or mine. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, I felt hopeful. Whatever happened next, I still had Kalia. That was something Milena couldn't take away from me. I love you, Grandma, she whispered. I love you too, darling, more than you know. As we walked back toward the reception together, my phone buzzed with a text message. Harold, on my way to pick you up. Important meeting moved to tonight. Are you ready? I smiled, typing back. More ready than I've ever been. The real celebration was about to begin. Kalia and I had just returned to the reception when I noticed a stir near the main entrance. The string quartet that had been providing gentle background music seemed to fade as conversations shifted and heads turned toward the doorway. A man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit was speaking quietly to the venue coordinator, who was nodding frantically and gesturing toward the reception area. Even from across the room, I could see the deference in her body language, the way she kept smoothing her dress and checking her hair as if she were suddenly nervous about her appearance. My heart began to race. I knew that silhouette, that confident posture, the way he commanded attention without saying a word. Harold had arrived. Who is that? I heard someone whisper nearby. He looks important. He did look important. Harold carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades making decisions that affected thousands of people and millions of dollars. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and even from this distance, I could see the subtle gleam of his gold watch, the only outward sign of his wealth that he allowed himself. The venue coordinator was leading him into the reception area now, clearly flustered by whatever conversation they'd just had. Harold's gaze swept the room methodically, professionally, like he was assessing an investment opportunity. When his eyes found mine, his expression softened just slightly, and he began moving in my direction. But he wasn't the only one who had noticed his arrival. Milena, who had been holding court near the bar with a group of David's business associates, had spotted him immediately. I watched as she excused herself from her conversation and began moving toward Harold with the kind of predatory grace she reserved for networking opportunities. She intercepted him about 20 feet from where I stood, extending her hand with her most dazzling smile. "Hello there," she purred, her voice pitched to carry just enough to let nearby guests know she was making an important connection. "I'm Milena Morrison, mother of the bride. I don't believe we've met." Harold stopped, looked at her extended hand for a moment, then glanced past her to where I stood. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was displeased. "Excuse me," he said politely but firmly, stepping around her without taking her hand. Milena's smile faltered, but she persisted, following him. "Are you a friend of the family? Business associate? I work in marketing, so I know how important it is to make connections at events like these." Harold continued walking toward me, ignoring her completely. The dismissal was so absolute, so professional, that it left Milena standing there with her mouth slightly open, unsure how to respond. I felt a flutter of nervous excitement as he approached. We had planned this moment, but seeing it unfold in reality was different, more intense, more final. "Mrs. Westbrook," Harold said as he reached me, his voice warm but carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet space around us. "I'm sorry I'm late. The meeting ran longer than expected." Mrs. Westbrook, the name I'd been using for over 2 years but had never spoken aloud in front of my family. The name that represented everything they didn't know about my life. I heard a sharp intake of breath from someone nearby. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw David pushing through the crowd, drawn by the growing circle of attention around us. "It's perfectly fine, darling," I replied, accepting the gentle kiss Harold placed on my cheek. "I knew you'd make it when you could." The word "darling" seemed to ripple through the nearby guests like a stone thrown into still water. I could practically feel the confusion and shock radiating from the people who had been laughing at me just an hour earlier. "Harold," David's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. My son appeared at my elbow, his face a mask of bewilderment. "I didn't know you were coming. Mom didn't mention." He trailed off, clearly struggling to process what he was seeing. His mother, the family embarrassment, being treated with obvious affection and respect by a man who radiated wealth and power. "David," Harold acknowledged with a polite nod. "Congratulations on your daughter's wedding. Beautiful ceremony." But there was something in Harold's tone, a coolness that hadn't been there when he'd spoken to me. David caught it too, his confusion deepening. Milena had recovered from her initial shock and was now bearing down on us with determination, her smile brittle but in place. "Well, this is wonderful," she said, her voice slightly too loud, too bright. "Ethel, you didn't tell us you were seeing someone. How exciting for you." Seeing someone. As if Harold were some casual boyfriend I'd picked up at a senior center dance. Harold's eyebrow rose slightly. "Seeing someone?" He looked at me with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "Ethel? You haven't told them?" The moment stretched out, pregnant with possibility. I could feel the weight of dozens of gazes, the anticipation of revelation. This was it, the moment when everything changed. "I wasn't sure the timing was right," I said carefully. "Family gatherings can be so complicated." Harold's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. "Well, I suppose there's never a perfect time for these things." He turned to address the growing crowd around us, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people automatically pay attention. "For those who don't know me, I'm Harold Westbrook," he said simply. "And Ethel isn't just seeing someone. She's my wife." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched faces around the circle process this information, saw the moment when recognition began to dawn on some of them. The name Westbrook carried weight in Charleston's business community, and Harold had never been one to hide from publicity when his company's successes warranted it. David's face had gone pale. Wife? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. We were married 2 years ago, Harold continued conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather. Ethel prefers to keep her private life private, which I respect completely. But when my business meeting was moved to tonight, I couldn't miss the opportunity to congratulate the happy couple. Milena looked like she'd been slapped. Her carefully constructed social facade was cracking, revealing the calculating mind underneath. 2 years? She managed. But you never said. I mean, we had no idea. Ethel values her independence, Harold replied smoothly. She's maintained her own residence, her own life. It's one of the many things I admire about her. I felt a warm glow at his words, but also a fierce satisfaction at the growing shock on Milena's face. She was beginning to understand that everything she thought she knew about me was wrong. I don't understand, David said. And for the first time in years, he sounded like the confused little boy he'd once been, rather than the dismissive adult he'd become. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Before I could answer, Harold's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at me. I'm afraid we need to leave soon, he said apologetically. The investors are gathering earlier than planned, and your input on the Morrison account will be crucial. Morrison account. The words hit the air like a bomb. I watched Milena's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror as she processed what Harold had just said. Morrison was her married name. Her account. Morrison account? She repeated, her voice barely steady. Harold looked at her with polite interest, as if he were seeing her for the first time. Morrison Marketing Solutions, yes. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that company, would you? The color drained completely from Milena's face as the implications began to sink in. She was staring at Harold like he was a ghost, then at me, like I was a stranger. Around us, the crowd was buzzing with whispered conversations, people putting pieces together, realizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary, but I could see that Harold wasn't finished yet. Actually, he said thoughtfully, didn't someone mention earlier that there was a Morrison in the wedding party? What a delightful coincidence. His smile was perfectly pleasant, perfectly professional, and absolutely terrifying. The next few minutes unfolded like a masterpiece of slow-motion destruction. I watched Milena's face as Harold's words sank in, saw the exact moment when she realized that her world was about to crumble. Morrison Marketing Solutions, Harold repeated thoughtfully, as if he were trying to place the name. Senior Account Manager, Milena Morrison. That wouldn't be you, would it? Milena's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Around us, the wedding guests had formed an impromptu audience, sensing drama, but not yet understanding its scope. Yes, she managed. That's my company. I work there. Harold nodded slowly, pulling out his phone and scrolling through what appeared to be emails. Interesting. I've been reviewing some personnel files this week. Your name came up in several discussions. I had to give Milena credit. She tried to rally. Straightening her shoulders, she forced her smile back into place, though it looked more like a grimace now. Well, what a small world, she said, her voice pitched too high. I had no idea Ethel knew anyone in the business community. What exactly is your connection to Morrison Marketing? Connection? Harold looked genuinely puzzled for a moment. Mrs. Morrison, I don't have a connection to your company. I own it. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the distant sound of waves against the harbor outside. Harold continued scrolling through his phone with the casual air of someone checking their grocery list, seemingly unaware of the devastation he'd just unleashed. Well, not directly. He corrected himself with scientific precision. Westbrook Holdings owns Morrison Marketing Solutions through our subsidiary, Coastal Business Ventures. We acquired it about 18 months ago as part of our expansion into regional marketing firms. Milena's face had gone from pale to gray. I watched her lips move silently as she processed the timeline. 18 months ago. Right around the time she'd been so proud of her promotion, so boastful about her increased salary and expanded responsibilities. David stepped forward, still looking confused. Mom, I don't understand any of this. How long have you known about Milena's work situation? It was Harold who answered. his tone conversational but somehow chilling. "Oh, Ethel and I discuss my business interests regularly. She has excellent instincts about people and situations. In fact, she's been particularly insightful about the Morrison account." He looked up from his phone, fixing Milena with a steady gaze. "She's mentioned several times that the company culture there might need some adjustments. Issues with workplace dynamics, employee morale, management effectiveness." I felt a thrill of dark satisfaction as I watched Milena's professional mask slip entirely. She was beginning to understand that every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every humiliation she'd inflicted on me hadn't gone unnoticed or unremembered. "Ethel never mentioned working in business," David said weakly, looking between Harold and me as if we were strangers. "I don't work in business," I said quietly, "but I am married to someone who does, and Harold values my opinions on all aspects of his life, including his investments." Harold smiled at me, the expression warm and genuine. "My wife has a remarkable ability to assess character. She sees things others miss, patterns of behavior that can predict long-term success or failure in any organization." The implied threat hung in the air like smoke. Milena was smart enough to catch it, and I could see panic beginning to set in behind her eyes. "Mr. Westbrook," she began, her voice carefully controlled, "I hope you don't think that family dynamics have any bearing on my professional performance. I've been with Morrison Marketing for 8 years, and my record speaks for itself." "Oh, I'm sure it does," Harold agreed pleasantly. "In fact, I've been reviewing your file quite thoroughly this week. Interesting reading." He tapped his phone screen a few times, then turned it slightly toward Milena. I couldn't see what he was showing her, but I watched her face go from gray to green. "The client retention numbers are particularly fascinating," Harold continued. "Several accounts expressing concerns about communication style, professionalism, cultural fit. Nothing actionable yet, of course, but patterns worth monitoring." Milena's hands were trembling now. She looked around desperately, as if searching for support, but the wedding guests were all staring with the horrified fascination of people watching a car accident unfold. "I think there might be some misunderstanding," she said, her voice barely steady. "I've always maintained the highest professional standards. If there have been complaints, I'm sure we can address them through proper channels." "I'm sure we can," Harold agreed. "In fact, I have a board meeting scheduled for Monday morning where we'll be discussing several personnel matters. Your name is definitely on the agenda." The threat was delivered so casually, so politely, that it took a moment for its full impact to register. When it did, Milena actually swayed on her feet. David finally seemed to grasp what was happening. "Wait," he said, his voice sharp with growing alarm. "Are you threatening my wife's job because of some family disagreement?" Harold looked at him with mild surprise. "Threatening? Not at all. I'm simply doing what any responsible business owner does, evaluating employee performance and cultural fit. The fact that your wife happens to be married into Ethel's family is entirely coincidental." But his tone suggested it was anything but coincidental. "This is insane," David said, his voice rising. "You can't punish someone professionally because of personal issues." "You're absolutely right," Harold replied calmly. "Employment decisions should be based solely on performance metrics, client feedback, and organizational needs. Personal relationships shouldn't factor into it at all." He paused, letting that sink in, then continued with devastating precision. "Which is why I'm particularly interested in the feedback we've been receiving about hostile work environment issues. Apparently, there have been concerns about bullying behavior, unprofessional conduct, and what one client described as toxic interpersonal dynamics." Milena's breath was coming in short gasps now. She looked around wildly, then focused on me with desperate intensity. "Ethel," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "we're family. Whatever differences we've had, surely we can work them out." "You wouldn't really." She couldn't finish the sentence, but the pleading in her eyes said everything. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent 15 years systematically erasing me from my own family's life, who had humiliated me in front of 200 people just hours earlier, who had called me a family pet. "Milena," I said softly, "I would never interfere with your professional life. That would be inappropriate." Relief flooded her face for just a moment. "However," I continued, "I also can't control how your behavior reflects on your character, or how that character assessment might factor into business decisions that have nothing to do with me." The relief vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Harold checked his watch, a platinum piece that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Speaking of business decisions, we really should be going. The investment committee meeting starts in an hour, and your insights will be valuable." He offered me his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "Mrs. Westbrook," as we prepared to leave, Kalia appeared at my side, her face flushed with confusion, and something that might have been admiration. "Grandma," she whispered, "I don't understand what just happened, but I'm proud of you." I kissed her cheek gently. "Enjoy your wedding night, sweetheart. We'll talk soon." As Harold and I walked toward the exit, I could hear the explosion of whispered conversations behind us, the shocked exclamations, the rapid-fire questions that no one could answer, but the only voice I focused on was Milena's, broken and desperate, calling after us. "Ethel, please, we need to talk, please." I didn't turn around. The ride to Harold's office was quiet, the leather seats of his Mercedes enveloping us in comfortable silence as Charleston's evening lights flickered past the windows. I stared out at the familiar streets, processing what had just happened, what we had just set in motion. "No regrets?" Harold asked softly, his hand finding mine across the center console. I considered his question carefully. Regrets about revealing our marriage? About letting Milena discover that her victim had more power than she'd ever imagined? About the shock on David's face when he realized his mother wasn't the pathetic figure he'd allowed her to become in his mind? "None," I said finally, and meant it. Harold squeezed my hand. "Good, because what happens next isn't going to be pleasant for any of them." The investment meeting was held in the top-floor conference room of Westbrook Holdings, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Charleston Harbor. As Harold had explained during our drive, this wasn't just any meeting. 3 major clients were considering pulling their accounts from Morrison Marketing Solutions, citing concerns about service quality and professional conduct. The Patterson account alone represents $2.3 million annually, Harold explained as we entered his office. They've specifically requested a change in account management, citing unprofessional behavior and what they called aggressive interpersonal dynamics. I sat in the chair across from his desk, watching him pull up files on his computer. Even after 2 years of marriage, I was still sometimes amazed by the scope of his business empire. Harold controlled investments and partnerships that affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. Yet he wore that power so lightly that most people never realized its extent. "The Coastal Development Group is threatening to terminate their contract entirely," he continued, scanning through emails. "They claim their account manager has been dismissive of their concerns and condescending in meetings." My phone buzzed constantly throughout our conversation, text after text from numbers I recognized and others I didn't. Word was spreading from the wedding and people wanted answers, explanations, gossip. "David, Mom, call me. Now. What the hell just happened?" "Milena, please, we need to talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Unknown number. This is Marcus. Mom is crying. Grandma, what did you do?" I turned the phone face down without responding to any of them. "They're panicking," I observed. Harold looked up from his screen. "They should be." The third client, Riverside Retail Consortium, has already submitted a formal complaint to Morrison's upper management. They're demanding either a complete account team change or they're taking their $3.8 million contract elsewhere. $7.1 million in potential lost revenue. The mathematics of consequence were stark and unforgiving. "What will happen to Morrison Marketing?" I asked. "That depends on how quickly they can address the client concerns," Harold replied. "If they lose all 3 accounts, they'll need to downsize significantly. Senior positions will be the first to go. The salaries are too high to justify when revenue drops that dramatically." My phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message he left. "Mom, I don't know what game you're playing, but this has gone too far. Milena's job is on the line. Our mortgage depends on her salary. You can't destroy our family because your feelings got hurt at a wedding. Feelings got hurt. As if 15 years of systematic emotional abuse could be reduced to hurt feelings. As if publicly humiliating me in front of 200 people was just a minor social misstep. I deleted the message. Harold's assistant knocked and entered with a stack of documents. The Morrison files you requested, Mr. Westbrook, and the client feedback summaries are on top. After she left, Harold spread the papers across his desk. Would you like to see what your daughter-in-law's clients really think of her? I nodded, and he handed me the top folder. The feedback was devastating. Client after client describing Milena as condescending, unprofessional, difficult to work with. One particularly damning review described her as someone who clearly believes she's more important than the people paying for her services. This has been building for months, Harold explained. Her supervisor has been trying to coach her, but the pattern of complaints keeps escalating. Tonight's revelation about her personal character simply confirms what we've been seeing professionally. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. I answered, curious. Ethel. The voice was tentative, uncertain. This is Patricia Jenkins. We met at the wedding tonight. Patricia Jenkins, David's boss's wife. I remembered her from the reception, one of the women who had laughed when Milena humiliated me. Yes, Patricia, how can I help you? I wanted to apologize for laughing earlier. I had no idea. We didn't realize who you were. Your husband seems like a very important man. Important. Not kind, not worthy of respect, but important. Because that was what mattered to people like Patricia Jenkins. Power and status, not basic human decency. Thank you for calling, I said politely, but didn't offer forgiveness. I was wondering, she continued, clearly uncomfortable. My husband Tom works with David, and we've heard there might be some business complications. I hope this won't affect their working relationship. Ah, there it was. She wasn't calling to apologize out of genuine remorse. She was calling because she was worried about her own interests. I'm sure Tom's professional relationship with David will be based on Tom's own merits, I said carefully. I have no influence over David's career decisions. Of course. But if there's anything we can do to smooth things over. I ended the call without responding. Social climbers, Harold observed with distaste. They smell blood in the water and immediately start positioning themselves. Over the next hour, my phone didn't stop. Friends of Milena's, colleagues of David's, even people I barely knew from church and the neighborhood. Word was spreading through Charleston's social networks like wildfire, and everyone wanted to either apologize for past slights or ensure they weren't caught in the blast radius of whatever was coming. The investment meeting itself was conducted with clinical precision. Harold presented the client concerns to the board with dispassionate professionalism. No mention of personal relationships, no hint of family drama. Just cold, hard business facts. Morrison Marketing Solutions had 3 options. Address the client concerns immediately and completely, accept the loss of major accounts and the subsequent downsizing, or be sold to a company better equipped to handle their client base. The timeline is tight, Harold explained to the board. Patterson wants a response by Friday. Coastal Development has given them until Monday. Riverside is prepared to terminate immediately if they don't see significant changes. Friday was 4 days away. Monday was 7 days. Not much time to salvage a career that had taken years to build. As we drove home later that evening, Harold was quiet, letting me process everything that had happened. The weight of it was enormous. Not just what we had revealed tonight, but what we had set in motion. She brought this on herself, I said finally, as much to convince myself as to inform Harold. Yes, she did, he agreed. The client complaints are real, Ethel. The performance issues are documented. We didn't manufacture this situation. We simply stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. My phone buzzed one final time as we pulled into our driveway. A text from Milena sent at 11:47 p.m. I know you hate me. I know I've been horrible to you. But please don't do this to my children. They don't deserve to suffer because their mother is a terrible person. I'm begging you. For the first time all evening, I felt something crack in my chest. Marcus was only 15, still in high school. This would affect him too, affect his college plans, his future. But then I remembered his text from earlier. "What did you do?" Not, "I'm sorry for how Mom treated you," or, "I understand why you're upset." He had immediately assumed I was the villain, just like his parents had taught him. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Some lessons come with a price. For 15 years, Milena had taught my family that cruelty had no consequences, that I would absorb any amount of abuse in silence. It was time for her to learn that she was wrong. 3 weeks after Kalia's wedding, I stood in the sunroom of Harold's house, our house now, arranging fresh flowers from the garden. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting everything in a warm, golden glow that seemed to symbolize the new chapter of my life. The house was nothing like the basement apartment I'd called home for so many years. Built in the 1920s and meticulously restored, it sat on 3 acres overlooking the Ashley River. The sunroom had been my favorite space from the moment Harold first showed it to me, with its wall of windows and comfortable reading nook where Oliver and Duchess had immediately claimed the best cushions. I had officially moved in the week before, finally ready to live openly as Mrs. Harold Westbrook. The pretense was over, the secret was out, and the relief was immense. My phone sat silent on the side table. I had changed my number 5 days earlier, keeping only the contacts I actually wanted to maintain. The constant barrage of calls, texts, and voicemails had become unbearable, and I realized I didn't owe anyone access to my peace of mind. Harold found me there as he returned from his morning walk, still fit and energetic at 71. He kissed my cheek and settled into the chair across from me with his coffee and the Charleston Post and Courier. "Morrison Marketing Solutions made the business section," he said, folding the paper to show me the headline, "Major Restructuring Following Client Departures." I read the article carefully. It was all there in dry business language. The loss of 3 major accounts, the need to reduce overhead costs, the elimination of several senior positions. Milena's name wasn't mentioned specifically, but the implications were clear. "She was let go yesterday," Harold said quietly, along with 2 other senior account managers. They offered her a junior position at 60% of her previous salary, but she declined. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a strange sort of sadness. Not for Milena. She had made her choices and earned her consequences. But for the waste of it all. 15 years of family relationships destroyed by cruelty that had never been necessary. "How did you find out?" I asked. "David called my office. Apparently, he's been trying to reach me for days, thinking he could negotiate some kind of deal." Harold's expression was carefully neutral. "He offered to have you visit more often, to include you in family events, if I would reconsider the business decisions." The audacity of it was breathtaking. Even now, facing the collapse of their comfortable life, they still saw me as a commodity to be traded, rather than a person to be respected. "What did you tell him?" I told him that business decisions are based on business criteria, and that his mother's personal relationships have never influenced my professional judgments. Harold's tone was mild, but I caught the underlying steel. I also told him that if he contacts my office again about family matters, I'll consider it harassment. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the river flow past our windows. The peace was something I was still getting used to. The absence of anxiety, of waiting for the next humiliation, of walking on eggshells around people who were supposed to love me. The doorbell rang, and Harold went to answer it. I heard voices in the front hall, one of them young and familiar. A few minutes later, Harold returned with Kalia behind him. My granddaughter looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing the kind of clothes that suggested she had gotten dressed without caring how she looked. "Grandma," she said, her voice breaking on the word. I stood and opened my arms, and she collapsed into them like she had when she was small, and the world seemed too big and scary to navigate alone. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have defended you. I should have known how bad it was." I held her while she cried. This beautiful girl who had been caught in the middle of something that wasn't her fault. When her sobs finally subsided, I led her to the sofa and sat down beside her. "Tell me what's been happening," I said gently. The story came out in pieces. The aftermath of the wedding had been devastating for my family. David was furious and humiliated, blaming everyone but himself for the situation. Milena had spent 3 days in bed crying, then emerged with a manic determination to fix everything, through increasingly desperate phone calls and emails. She even went to Mr. Westbrook's office building, Kalia said, wiping her eyes with the tissue Harold had quietly provided. Security wouldn't let her up to his floor, but she waited in the lobby for 3 hours until they threatened to call the police. "And Marcus?" I asked. Kalia's face crumpled again. "He's so angry, Grandma. He blames you for everything. Dad has been telling him that you manipulated Mr. Westbrook into destroying Mom's career out of spite. The pain of that was sharp and immediate. Marcus had been such a sweet little boy, always excited to see me, always full of questions and stories. But 15 years of his parents' influence had shaped his view of me just as surely as it had shaped everyone else's." "I tried to explain," Kalia continued. "I told him about all the times Mom was cruel to you, all the ways she excluded you and made fun of you, but he says that's just normal family stuff, that you're being dramatic. Normal family stuff." My heart ached for the boy who had been taught that cruelty was normal, that humiliation was acceptable, that respect had to be earned but contempt could be freely given. "What about you?" I asked. "How are you handling all this?" Kalia was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the river. "I keep thinking about things," she said finally. "Like how Mom would always change the subject when I talked about calling you. Or how she would plan family dinners when she knew you had other commitments. Or how she would make jokes about your apartment and your cats, and we were all supposed to laugh along." She turned to look at me, her eyes clear and honest. "I thought it was just her personality, you know? I thought that's how families worked, that there was always someone who got picked on a little bit. I didn't realize how systematic it was, how cruel." I took her hand, feeling the warmth of this one connection that Milena hadn't been able to poison completely. "I don't expect you to choose sides," I said. "David is your father, and whatever else is true, he loves you." "But I have chosen," Kalia said firmly. "I've chosen to be better than they taught me to be. I've chosen to see you as you really are instead of the way Mom painted you." We talked for another hour, about the past and the future, about the family that was broken and the relationships that might still be salvaged. When she left, it was with plans to have dinner the following week, just the 3 of us, Harold, Kalia, and me. That evening, as Harold and I sat in the garden watching the sunset, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 6 months ago, I had been the family embarrassment, living in a basement apartment, enduring whatever scraps of attention my relatives chose to throw my way. Now I was Mrs. Harold Westbrook, living in a beautiful home, respected and valued by the man who shared my life. I had discovered that I didn't need my family's approval to be worthy of love and respect. "Any regrets?" Harold asked, echoing his question from weeks earlier. I considered it seriously. Did I regret that David was struggling to understand how badly he had failed as a son? Did I regret that Milena was facing the consequences of years of professional misconduct? Did I regret that Marcus had been taught to see me as the villain in his family's story? "I regret that it took so long," I said finally. "I regret that I spent 15 years accepting less than I deserved because I was afraid of losing what little I had." Harold reached over and took my hand. "You're not that person anymore." "No," I agreed, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. "I'm not." The last text message I had received before changing my number had been from David. "I hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed our family." But he was wrong. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply stopped pretending that cruelty was love, that abuse was normal, that I deserved to be treated as less than human by people who claimed to care about me. The family that had been built on my silence and submission was indeed destroyed. But from its ashes, something better was growing. Relationships based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the radical idea that every person deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. As the stars began to appear over the river, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: complete peace. I was exactly where I belonged, with people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. I was finally, truly free. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.